We're going to be talking about how to build trust through your organization by cultivating sort of a nice set or workflow of data quality at every stage of the data lifecycle as it goes through. So with that, we'll start. The sort of reality is that we're living in a very data-driven world. Our confidence in our data oftentimes is directly correlated with confidence within our own business and business processes, right? The idea here is oftentimes these sort of data-driven decision making that sort of dominated modern business considerations have put us in a position where we're increasingly dependent on data, and oftentimes what started off as decision support systems in the past have quickly evolved to decision-making systems. And these models and systems are really only as good as the data that we feed them. And this being the case, our sort of data quality determines the value that we can extract from our data investments that we put effort into in the past. In our modern world, we oftentimes do things like instantly tailor customer experiences, make strategic decisions, and even do things like regulatory reporting, all based on the data that we have at any given point in time. And all of these things sort of rely on our data being quickly accessible. There's sort of transparency to how the numbers got to where they got. And we have a quick idea of if anything went wrong. So that's sort of the idea. And this is all translated into data quality. Data quality is a measure of a data set's accuracy, completeness, consistency, and reliability. It's really the key to utilizing our data for its intended purposes, whether it's analytics or reporting or trying to do, split second decision making. They all rely on our data being right and sort of serve to the right audience at the right time. Now, data quality, because of this, can and should occur at all steps throughout the data lifecycle. Degrading data quality often results directly in a degradation of trust of data throughout organization, and oftentimes creates sort of this backwards evolution. So, for example, let's say we're migrating to a new sort of database or a new data warehouse. Even if we've invested in creating a new data environment, it's only as good as the data, the quality that we put in there, right? So if we have bad data, it sort of puts us in a position where historically we're going to be doing sort of a backwards devolution, if you will, as far as the utility of the numbers that we're providing, whether it's to a data warehouse or an AI model, whatever it needs to be in general. That's why we really focus in this whole webinar is about building that culture of trust through the organization. With so much of our sort of value-driven economy relying on our data sets, we can't compromise the trust without, sort of compromising the entire organization as a whole. And the sort of solid foundational trust creates, the focus of eliminating uncertainty first. A single misstep in any step of this process can undo quite a great bit of effort. And that's why solid foundational data quality practices should be the cornerstone of any organization in order any sort of data environment in general. This is sort of, how we split this up is sort of three main groups that are oftentimes using data. As you can see in orange, we have data owners. Those are oftentimes owners of applications or certain processes. Think of, someone who owns your ERP system or sort of a CRM system, something like that, where you're consistently pulling information. They're sitting in databases at rest, and sort of our central source and targets for a lot of our different data processes. That data is often accessed by power users. Power users are more sort of in the more data engineering side. They're creating that middle pipelines to send data to eventually end users. More think of less technical users that are more BI oriented, business users in general. They're sort of the people that would have the domain experts to have the data knowledge of how data needs to be utilized, but maybe don't have the technical skills to implement data quality for business users, right? That's sort of one way to think about them. But all three of these groups are jointly responsible for our end data quality and really the trust that we can have in an organization in general. Oftentimes, they rely on each other. Power users will have to serve this data up with their skill set. Data owners often own sort of these end systems and are responsible for cleanup and things like that. So throughout this webinar, we're going to be going through sort of different techniques and tools that each one of these different personas, if you will, can utilize to really get and do their part and contribute to data quality throughout our organization as a whole. So, oftentimes this is sort of a simple example, but it's pretty common in sort of our world is we have experience of data owners having sort of that source database and applications, CRMs, ERPs. And like I mentioned before, the power users are going to be using data pipelines, ETL tools, different sort of techniques to create frameworks to serve clean and usable data sets, and sort of monitor and manage data access throughout the organization. So they're going to be doing the direct pulls from these sources, and sort of creating and curating data sets that are used by end users in a lot of different ways, right? Those end users oftentimes are feeding sort of Excel, Power BI, other sort of tools and applications that have their own data owners, but there's sort of that in between, right? There's sort of an orchestra or sort of orchestration around this process where we have the technical power users with the ability to quickly get us and pipeline us data as business users that we need, and the end users that are going to do that final, think of 5-10% of data preparation, getting a nice clean data set, but tailoring it specifically for whatever insight we need to pull from it, right? The idea here is we want to be able to somehow increase output quality and consistency throughout this whole process by freeing up time also on repeated tasks. So it's sort of a dual purpose. Ideally, we want this entire process to be happening on a single platform. That way, there's sort of clear communication on boundaries between responsibilities and how data is accessed in general. Here at Clover DX, we ourselves are a data integration platform that are sort of tailored to those two different personas that I mentioned before. The power users who have a full development environment to create automated data pipelines and business processes, and the end users who are finding, the last 5-10% that they need of value to extract from these data sets by getting smart access to data, doing individual data preparation for their different reporting purposes or sort of business intelligence applications as well. The idea here is we serve the full spectrum of users. This sort of unified data environment caters, to both technical and non-technical users, but most importantly, it gives us in a situation where every time, we have data travel between technical and non-technical teams, oftentimes we do risk data quality in these exchanges, right? We could have an end user doing specific requests for data sets without having a unified process around it. It's sort of difficult to understand what changes over time, right? The idea here is let's make a single unified process wherever we can so that that sort of interchange between these two can be as seamless as possible and as automated as possible as well. So with that, we're going to talk about the culture of trust, all the, these three different personas that we talked about. And the idea is what can our power users, our data engineers, our data scientists do to contribute to data quality? What can our end users, our more business oriented, C-level executives or business intelligence analysts do to contribute to data quality on their side? And then what can the final data owners do to also do their part in this whole process as well? These three together will create that culture of trust and responsibility with clear boundaries between them to understand, sort of where they're at. Some of the techniques are pretty similar, but the implementations are different, again, based on our technical or non-technical expertise. Each one of these personas have different strong points and weak points in regards to that. So with that, we're going to start with power users. And these are just some of the techniques that we sort of recommend for these sort of engineers. The first concept is designing for bad data. The idea is that we expect not everything to be perfect. We want to design processes for handling this poor data and quickly identifying it as well, right? We don't expect, for example, our CRM to have every customer's phone number perfectly filled in or having everyone's email exactly correct, right? But we want to allow these processing to be done on good records. So, we want to be able to proceed a nice happy path of data and do some sort of optional rerouting of these bad records in general, right? So sort of a separation at that point where we're building these data pipelines is really key to creating process where it's not too restrictive. We're allowing our critical key process to go through and be followed through on. But we're going through and sort of collecting the junk as it comes into this middle sort of power user area. Um, and then, giving a nice feedback loop to owners to be able to give them the ability to fix these bad records. Another sort of technique for this is in general is called data profiling. Uh, Data profiling is a holistic assessment of entire data sets, and oftentimes sort of prevents processing of suspect data. This is sort of the most simple example I can give is, let's say we have a database field that has a certain like mean, median, and mode sort of statistical tests on certain fields, right? Like we don't expect the price of a ticket to be $1 million if the average is, $10, for example. We sort of are able to take out outliers in our data set, understand holistically um, where we're at, and if it's beyond expected values, it's a clear indication that the entire data set might have some sort of compromise to it. So it's sort of an early warning of data decay and trends in data that allows to, rather than go through the effort of processing record by record, it gives us a macro look at an entire data set and understand if there's something wrong with it off the bat before we go through the sort of time-consuming process of doing a record by record show of it. The other sort of technique is fixing the bad data. So the ability to sort of design processes to collect, consolidate, and share. A huge part of this is building robust processes that can be restarted at different points. So, I'll show you guys in a moment sort of a data pipeline, but the idea is that at different points, there's different fail safes, and this entire process can be restarted, at different points away from source and target, without sort of compromising our critical business needs for this data to be pushed through. And sort of the tool set that we provide for this in general, a huge part of this is creating those automated data frameworks, right? ETL processes should be more than just a point-to-point integration between two systems. We really are ideally designing automated frameworks that identify problematic data, create automated error handling and reporting. So when things do go wrong, we're able to share this report with someone on the ownership side or the business side to let them understand exactly what's going on. The ability to create operations dashboards, and really to connect and utilize validation tools available on source and target sides. So being interact with the database who has certain constraints, and sort of, the power user is sort of the key to creating this automated data framework to create that ideal data scenario. With that, we're sort of going to jump into a quick example of what this might look like in different tools. In our tool, CloverDX, it's in the form of CloverDX Designer. CloverDX Designer is a nice sort of drag and drop tool. It's essentially an ETL tool. We're designing data pipelines for the power user, right? The power user's sitting here and being able to quickly look into a file, see what it looks like. Like I mentioned earlier, the idea here is we have sort of a data profiler that's doing statistical tests, getting an understanding of, hey, what's the mean, median, mode of these different, data sets? What's the average of each of these different fields? And if it's an acceptable file, which in this case it is, it'll go ahead and run the rest of this process. If it's unacceptable, then we're going to stop this process right here. It's not worth it. Not worth our time. The idea here is we're reading data in, and we have sort of a split here, right? We have a split between our happy path, if you will, from up here, where we're being sort of loaded into our data warehouse, which is our target. And then the path where it's sort of rejecting these records based on data quality rules that I have set up. And these data quality rules are nice, sort of human readable. This is a very simple example. We're just looking at different fields and enabling and disabling them as needed. But the idea here is that this could be a set of, sort of constraints that can be, 30 or 40 rules long, whatever you need it to be, whether it's validating an email address or a phone number or making sure that a certain field is not greater than some sort of constraint. And it's a nice way for us to be able to quickly and easily identify problematic records and send them to their own sort of process, right? Like I mentioned before, we're creating a framework where we're reading in some sort of file. I'll go ahead and run it so you can see what this looks like. And it's logging sort of rejected records in its own sort of piece here, creating a nice aggregate report for, let's say, business users as well. So it's sort of creating nice, clear communications that allows to see, hey, here's something that a business user would be interested in, serving up data to a data warehouse, and also logging rejected records with a nice validation message that gives you specifically what happened with the specific record and why it's not acceptable in this data set. And maybe, to create a unified process, the next step in this process would be the ability to send an email to someone, right? The idea here is with these drag and drop components, we enable power users to create a data scenario where we're easily processing records with sort of saving time. We're not scripting this out. This is dynamic. This could be sort of used in any data process in general. And we're sort of serving data up to business users in different flavors, in different ways that's useful for them, right? And then, something like our rejected records, things that don't pass our data quality tests can easily be sort of consolidated down into one single sort of spreadsheet that's human readable that can be sent over to the data ownership to say, hey, go check out record number 15 and 18. Here's why, etc. So just a nice sort of workstation for us to be able to create and design data pipelines to create those frameworks that serve up data as needed to different stakeholders throughout our organization. It's really the heart, sort of an ETL tool with different considerations around data quality. So that's sort of our power user story and how we can sort of contribute to this quality of trust, right? It's very transparent. It's very easy to follow. Anyone can log in here and see, hey, this is what's happening in this process in general. We're reading files. You can leave little notes and get an understanding of what happened on the more technical end of the spectrum. On the less technical side of the spectrum, we have what's called sort of our business users. These guys are this sort of crowd is sort of more Power BI analysts, that sort of crowd. And the key here to getting them and contributing to data quality is sort of the ability to avoid human error. We want to, again, create an automated transformation of tasks instead of manual inputs. So don't feel the need as an organization or have the practice of opening up a problematic spreadsheet and, chasing down record by record and filtering and manually changing inputs. That's not a very reliable or consistent way of sort of going about this process. The idea here is refining a recipe for these data sets that are provided to us from our power users. And maybe they get us 85% of the way to where we want to be, but let's refine a recipe for the last 10, 15%. Let's not sort of reduce ourselves down to manual processes that are, sort of unsustainable at a macro business level. Throughout our organization, it's a lot easier to be able to look at a recipe, know how something is done, rather than to say, hey, Calvin did this 2 months ago, go ask him how to do it. We want to have these be nice, repeatable processes. Therefore, avoiding the human error part of this. How do we do this? We sort of separate quality data from problematic records by incorporating validation rules, very similar to the power user story, but the means to which we're going to do this are a bit different. We want to be able to put validation checks into workflows and use tools that streamline validations in nice human readable formats. So it's sort of, again, from that spectrum that I showed you earlier, we're building a culture of trust so that anyone can look at these sort of more simple pipelines and get an understanding of what happens, sort of at an individual data preparation level. How do we do this? We provide these business users with a tool set that creates semi-automated processes designed by domain knowledge experts. This is really key here because oftentimes on the power user side, we're just serving up data, don't necessarily know what that end ideal point looks like or what it even means. So we are enabling people with domain expertise to create simpler data automation and transformation flows, and having sort of a shared data catalog with high quality, reliable data. So rather than have a business user have to do their own SQL query and take that and put it to a spreadsheet, take a look at it, filter, do aggregations, do a pivot, things like that, it'd be much easier for them to be able to just look somewhere, get a nice clean data set, and then be able to do that last 10, 15% and build their own recipe in a nice visual way. And that's really what, the key to this is going to be Data Wrangler. Data Wrangler is sort of a component of Clover DX that I'm going to show you now. but it's sort of that meeting point between the power user that I explained earlier and the business user. Um, Data Wrangler allows business users to come into here to this data catalog. And as a meeting point, these are all sort of um, data sets that have been curated by my power user team. So I can easily see, hey, what are my employees by revenue? I, as a business user, can click in and say, hey, this is something that's useful for me. I'd like to use it in a job. Maybe it's, the start of something that I need, but it's not quite there. I need to do some other things to this data set to extract the full value based on my domain knowledge expertise and what exactly I'm trying to accomplish on the business side. I can go through and say, hey, I want to be able to, read my employee information and do some things to that data set so it's finally usable for some sort of different reason, right? All these jobs are sort of nice, human readable ways for me to sort of edit them. So we have an in-browser editor to create transformation rules and validation rules that allow us to look at a certain field, do our validation based on different filters, sort of validate if it's within different ranges, fixing different errors. So again, going back to that concept of fixing data at different points, maybe the power user had no idea that this is a problem, but I, as a domain expert, know that, hey, this is going to be an issue when I try to analyze this information. So let me remove anything with an error, or let me create a custom formula, do different manipulations, filter this data based on what I'm really interested at a certain point. But all coming from a source that's sort of clean, or as clean as it can be from the power user or data owner side. At the end here, I'm getting a nice sort of usable data set that I'm doing different calculations on and writing out to some sort of different target, right? This is what I mentioned before, is creating the recipe. As we're starting with a data set that's quite simple, it gets a little bit more complex as we're doing lookups, doing things like replacing certain texts, doing data quality checks. But the idea here is we're creating a recipe. So the next time that I want to run this, rather than guess or say Calvin in accounting did this months ago, go ask him. It's here. It's ready for all of us as an organization to utilize, to have the ability to have a domain expert design a process for the last 10, 15% of our data. It's really invaluable because it can be sort of consolidated into a single place where I can look at my jobs and say, amazing, here's what I'm trying to do. I want to upload payments or do different payment processing. And at a macro level, as an organization, be able to say, hey, I ran this job today. I tried to run it, and like I said before, we have that happy path of good records that pass our data quality checks written through. But at step 16 of the recipe, I had 273 records that I had a problem with. And I can even specifically click into here and say, see exactly what happened historically as well. So it really provides us with a nice GUI for the people who are experts in that final 10 or 15% of our data transformations, data quality needs, really push for what they need and to get the most value out of our data sets as possible. With all respect to, again, creating that unified, trust throughout our organization. It's very transparent as to where this source came from, where it's coming from, sort of a data catalog level, curated specifically for business users with power users who are using all the tools available to them to create nice clean data sets, and then me taking it the final mile as a business user in general. So that's really a way to have everything sit on a unified platform and really sort of be very transparent, create nice trust. And if problems ever rise up, there's a very easy to follow paper trail that lets you know what happened. And finally, we have sort of techniques for data owners. This is more sort of generic advice, but it's very sort of important because everything starts and ends at these sources and targets. But we want to protect your domain by setting up cleansing and healing processes, right? Like I mentioned earlier, if you own a CRM and you know that you don't have phone numbers or emails for these different users, you want to be able to build processes that focus on quality and getting quality leads in your CRM, having the right information ready for your end users as needed. This oftentimes boils down to the leads at those different positions, being able to put emphasis on cleaning up and healing processes. Here at Clover, we ourselves have this sort of set up and implemented in HubSpot CRM, where we have designed Clover DX jobs. And again, having the unified process between our business users who are using this data to create leads and reach out to customers, and power users such as myself that set up these processes to reach into HubSpot, grab a list of any lead without contact information that's proper or validated email addresses, things like that, and create the right tool set, right? We have these automations within the apps, so oftentimes we have workflows and triggers, data definition tools, but also how we share rules and permissions within these applications. And again, on the power user side, being able to reach out and do those data healing processes as pointed to by our more business focused team. A lot of this also comes down to just rule books and trainings and creating sensible safeguards for incoming data. For example, if you're writing to a database, set up some constraints on certain data types or length of data sets, for example. Pretty simple stuff, but you'd be surprised how often this is overlooked, even in production. So just simple things to be able to set up. And again, everyone being able to do their part to create a sort of culture of trust throughout any organization in one transparent, platform, ideally.